sort of the impetus in a lot of ways for this conversation focuses on a really more of a tactical question, which is the use of hunger strikes and the history of that, particularly in Palestine, but certainly in the prisons in California. And as a tactical issue, it's been used as a kind of a fulcrum or a vehicle to put out human rights demands in both situations and to acknowledge the fundamental struggle between those people who are in the cages and why they're in fact there and why they're there for as long as they are. And the conditions, we don't want to just assume that the conditions, in U.S. prisons and those in Palestine are identical, or the way the state functions is exactly the same. But there has been a body of work done over the years to create a sense of internationalism and even a level of direct communication from people engaged in hunger strikes. And certainly that's true in the state of California. I want to remind people that recently, and Lara will get into this, as well as Addameer, until, there was a 40-day hunger strike that was done by 1,500 prisoners, at least, in the Zionist prisons in Palestine, that ended roughly May 28th, although there are individual strikes that continue. But this was a collective effort with a range of demands, all of which focusing on basic needs and human rights issues. We can go into that, but Addameer covers it pretty well. The history of hunger strikes as a tactic, certainly we have to remember the Irish in the 80s, in which people died in the course of waging the struggle against the occupation by the British in Ireland. There were hunger strikes going back to roughly 2002 by prisoners in Guantanamo held by the U.S. Again, about human rights and treatment, and in some ways Guantanamo, which is a prison run by the U.S., is far more similar to the forms of imprisonment that take place of Palestinians, because most of the people in Guantanamo were never even charged with anything, and that's a common practice. I just want to remind people that in the Bay Area, like in 2005, we actually pulled together a conference that was called Attica to Abu Ghraib to try to focus on some of these questions. For those in the room who were there, it was actually a pretty significant step to create an internationalist view of national liberation and the issue of repression and what role prisons play. And then in 2013, we revisited that same kind of dynamic by doing what we call Pelican Bay to Palestine, to again try to connect struggles in U.S. prisons to the Palestinian prisoners. So having said that, that's kind of the general framing, not to get hung up on hunger strikes as a tactical issue, but to use them as a vehicle to bring some of this conversation together. And we'll all speak to that in one way or another. We'll try to be conversational, but I think we'll start at this point, unless you want to say something. This presentation by Addameer is about 12 minutes, as I recall, and it is pretty thorough, and then we'll come back together after that and continue some level of conversational presentation and bring you into it. Does that seem okay? Well, thank you for being here for this. It's important, so cool.
Hi everyone, my name is Dait Abu Zayyad. I'm the International Advocacy Officer for Addameer. I was hoping to be with you in San Francisco, but unfortunately we couldn't do it, so I had to do it. I had to record myself and send this video to you guys. and hopefully the event will be great, and special thanks to the organizers. Addameer is a Palestinian non-governmental organization that focuses specifically on civil and political rights, especially those of Palestinian political prisoners within Israeli prisons and within Palestinian Authority prisons. The organization was established in 1992 by a group of activists and human rights defenders, mainly to provide free legal services for Palestinian political prisoners. The organization has now 4 different units. There is the advocacy unit, which campaigns for prisoners both internationally and locally, and we work within the UN special procedures as well, and also we do lobbying within like the EU, the US, and also different countries. There is the documentation unit that documents the human rights violations within Israeli prisons and also within Palestinian Authority prisons. There is a training and awareness unit that works with the local public to raise awareness regarding the issue of prisoners, and also it holds the Know Your Rights session through like visiting different cities and refugee camps across the West Bank in order to tell people of the rights they have in case someone gets arrested. And also there is finally the legal unit, which I said in the beginning, it provides free legal services for political prisoners within Israeli prisons and also within Palestinian Authority prisons. So just to give a general background about the issue of prisoners, the arrest and detention of Palestinians take place within the context of the Israeli occupation, and are used as a measure of repression and control of the occupied Palestinian population. Since the beginning of the Israeli occupation, more than 800,000 Palestinians have been arrested, which constitutes 20% of the entire population and 40% of the male population. The current number of political prisoners is 6,200, and it almost includes 500 administrative detainees, 300 children, and 56 female prisoners. All of these prisoners are spread around 17 prisons and 4 detention centers and 4 interrogation centers, and only 1 prison is located in the West Bank, and the rest are located inside 1948 territories, which is in contravention with Article 76 of the 4th Geneva Convention, which states that an occupied power must detain residents of an occupied territory within the occupied territory. So the general conditions within Israeli prisons are normally very bad, and this is why Palestinian prisoners have resorted to hunger strikes as early as 1968 in order to have their demands heard and to push the Israeli prison service to meet the demands of the prisoners. So the hunger strike that started on the 17th of April 2017 by the prisoners movement the prisoners had a very long list of demands, but some of these major demands is ending the policy of administrative detention, stopping the Israeli authorities from using solitary confinement, to have more family visits, and also access to education and other basic demands that the prisoners had in order to have better conditions. The strike was similar to previous hunger strikes in terms of like the nature of the demands that the prisoners had, and this is not the first time that prisoners go on hunger strike, which shows that it's the only way and the last resort used by prisoners in order to achieve their demands. And it tells so much, the fact that the prisoners are willing to sacrifice their lives says a lot about how little faith prisoners have in the Israeli judicial system and also in the Israeli prison service that denied them their basic human rights. So the hunger strike ended after 41 days on the 26th of May 2017, and according to the head of the Commission of Prisoners' Affairs, that 80% of the hunger striking prisoners' demands have been met. This is not certain because the prisoners' movement haven't issued their official statement yet, and there have been different news reports about the nature the nature of the agreement that was made with the prisoners, between the prisoners and the Israeli prison service. So we can't really comment about regarding the nature of the agreement that was made, but according to what the Prisoners Club and the Commission of Prisoners Affairs they're saying that most of the prisoners' demand have been met. Addameer played an important role during the hunger strike, whether through organizing local events with families of prisoners and also meeting diplomats and officials in order to pressure them to push the Israeli government to meet the demands of the hunger striking prisoners. And also, like, although Addameer had very limited access to Israeli prisons because the Israeli prison service didn't allow Addameer to visit hunger striking prisoners, so we had a very difficult time gathering information regarding the health condition of prisoners, and also most of the hunger striking prisoners were denied attorney visits. So it was hard to gather information, but Addameer did, of course, work very hard in order to have information regarding the hunger strike, and also to lobby internationally and locally to pressure the Israeli government to meet the demands of the prisoners. And of course, we did communicate on a regular basis with families of prisoners to let them know about the situation of their loved ones inside the prisons, and also any developments regarding the hunger strike. During the hunger strike, there were different solidarity actions taken, whether locally and internationally. In Palestine, there were several demonstrations and also solidarity tents across Palestine, and also several clashes that took place with Israeli soldiers. And also one Palestinian that was killed by an Israeli settler during one of these demonstrations that were held in solidarity with hunger striking prisoners. So the situation on the ground witnessed instability, and clashes were almost happening everywhere as a result of the hunger strike, and also families of prisoners were protesting every day, sleeping in the solidarity tents in order to pressure the PA and also other governments to negotiate with the Israeli prison service. On an international level, different demonstrations were held in solidarity with hunger striking prisoners, and vigils and solidarity stances, and also pressuring their own governments also to respond to the hunger strike in order to save the lives of hunger striking prisoners. And all of these solidarity actions are much appreciated by Addameer and also by the Palestinian population because there was mass mobilization internationally in support of the hunger strike, and also there was the salt and water challenge that was also launched by some activists in order to raise awareness regarding the issue of the hunger strike that made the demands of hunger striking prisoners public. And also different media outlets were covering the hunger strike internationally, which highlighted the issue of Palestinian prisoners within Israeli prisoners, and what rights the prisoners lack and the conditions they are living in. So the hunger strike was a response to Israel's prolonged occupation, also Israeli authorities' treatment of Palestinian prisoners. And the hunger strike, of course, isn't detached from reality because it's a response to what's happening on the ground, and the arrest of Palestinians take place as a result of the occupation and of building more settlements, and also the siege over Gaza. And this is how normally Palestinians get arrested, when they respond to Israel's policies, and also when they resist the occupation. That's how they get arrested. So the hunger strike was used by prisoners as a last resort in order to protest the illegality of the occupation that has been going on for 50 years. And because there was no other means for prisoners to have their demands met by the Israeli prison service. Since the October 2015 uprising, Israel started a mass arrest campaign which also targeted children that received very high sentences and also very bad treatment by the Israeli authorities and the Israeli prison service. So as I said in the beginning, almost 20% of the Palestinian population have been imprisoned since 1967, which means that every family of 5 has or had one of its family members arrested. which is a very high percentage and can be very destructive for the Palestinian society. So the prison experience is very traumatizing and can be very destructive for the Palestinian society, and especially for children. And imprisonment targets almost every sector of the Palestinian society, including students, legislative council members, which takes place as a way of controlling the political life and also the social life within the Palestinian society. And as a mean of repression, and also as a tool of controlling the society as a whole. So hunger strikes in general have very positive outcomes. Like some of these outcomes is the fact that the issue of political prisoners is becoming like more public, and also for the prisoners had some of their demands met. So currently they have better conditions within Israeli prisons and detention centers. And the fact that we're discussing the issue of the hunger strike in this event is also a positive outcome, because we're highlighting the issue of prisoners, discussing what the hunger strike achieved, what the hunger strike didn't achieve, and also raising awareness regarding the issue of political prisoners and the importance of always standing in solidarity with Palestinian political prisoners long denied their basic rights within Israeli prisons and detention centers. Okay, in conclusion, I would like to thank the organizers and also the audience for listening to this recording. I was hoping to be like live with you guys because there are so many things to talk about. I hope what I said about the hunger strike was enough. However, if you have like any more information, feel free to contact the organization or to visit Addameer's website. It's www.addameer.org. And then you will have like more information regarding the previous hunger strike and also the issue of political prisoners in general. I'm very sorry that was like a very short recording, but hopefully it was enough. And thank you guys so much. Bye.
So, maybe we could each say just some very brief biographical thing ourselves and what brings us here. That's pretty cool. And then we'll launch into this.
So, hi everyone. My name is Lara. I work at AROC, the Arab Resource and Organizing Center, which is right here on Valencia Street. And I grew up in the Bay Area. My family are Palestinian, so we come from a Palestinian refugee family. My mom is from what Leif was talking about, 1948 Palestine, which is now known as Israel. My father is from the outskirts of Jerusalem. And I was the first in my family to be born and raised here in the United States. And grew up in a pretty politicized home particularly around Palestine. And so was very cultured to understand my identity as a Palestinian in opposition to assimilation politics here in the United States. It also shaped my politics as a college student of immigration, organized in student work, and then came to AROC and have been doing local organizing, connecting anti-repression, anti-Zionism, anti-war work here and internationally.
Hello, my name is Marie Levin, and I am a family member of a prisoner. My brother was a hunger striker as well, but and I say as well because I'm referring to the film. But I got involved in this work because of my brother being locked in solitary confinement for 31 years here in America for a crime that he did not commit. And the person that did commit the crime admitted to it on the witness stand and got out after 5 years. And so he served that time. Right now he is in general population. But he's been locked up now 36 years. And so that's how I got involved in this work. I worked during that time with Prisoner Hunger Strike Solidarity Coalition, and California Families Against Solitary Confinement, and he worked hard to make changes in the system. And through a lawsuit that took place in 2012 that ended in 2015, that's the reason why my brother was out of solitary confinement. It was not due to the hunger strikes, although they did 3 different separate hunger strikes, and but it didn't result in the kind of change that we wanted. But due to the lawsuit, the changes did happen. So we can talk about that later if time permits. But I'm a native of California, born in Berkeley, raised in Oakland, and I've been here basically all my life. And my husband is sitting right there, Randy Levin. And we have 5 sons between us. So, anyway, I think that's about it.
Cool, thanks. My name is Claude Marks. I'm a former U.S. held political prisoner. I've been pretty active for most of my life. My own imprisonment is in support of the Puerto Rican independence struggle, but in the course of organizing work, I've been very involved with Black liberation and indigenous struggles and the Chicano movement as well. As a former political prisoner, I feel a responsibility and a compulsion to work to get our other political prisoners out. But as a human being, the idea of imprisonment as a structural necessity for the system is totally abhorrent as well. So whether people are locked up for political reasons or come to consciousness inside or don't, I don't see mass imprisonment as a solution for any of the contradictions, but really points to the necessity to really address the structural issues in the society and to change them as a way of, in the long term, correcting the inequalities and the human rights violations that are carried out on a daily basis by this government, both internally and externally. So that's kind of who I am, that said. I think maybe to key off of the presentation by Addameer, I think it'd be helpful, Lara, for you to maybe fill in some of the things that aren't necessarily there or to reflect on them in some way.
Sure. I think, Addameer plays a very significant role in the Palestinian society at large, but in particular the Palestinian prison movement. And we did a really good job of outlining their work and also the recent hunger strike. And what could be maybe useful for me to share is how, as Palestinians or Arab and diaspora, how we relate to that work and the role it plays even locally, and how we specifically related to that particular hunger strike as Arabs and Palestinians and those committed to the liberation of Palestine here in the Bay Area. So, the significance of hunger strikes particularly is related to the significance of political imprisonment in Palestine. And the fact that, as Leif described, 40% of the male population is imprisoned, and 20% of the entire population has been imprisoned, is indicative of the role that imprisonment plays in the occupation itself, but also over time, because of the ways in which the Palestinian liberation movement has been fractured through the peace negotiations, and the ways in which it shifted from liberation to statehood, has also made the movement of prisoners that much more significant and instrumental in sort of anchoring the Palestinian diaspora and those committed to liberation to that historical struggle and the anti-colonial nature and character of that struggle. And because of the fracturing of the movement after Oslo in the peace accords, where there was some unity, were actually the prisons right? So prior to that, it was the liberation movement that was supporting, uplifting, defending, all those facing all sorts of repression under the Israeli occupation. And after Oslo, it wasn't as simple because of the fracturing of the parties and the movement at large, and because of the development of the Palestinian Authority, which in itself was instrumental in making sure that more people were in prison for the sake of the state of Israel. So at that point, organizations like Addameer popped up, right? So the fact that it was started in 1992 is actually directly related to the fact that Oslo was right around that time, right? So there needed to be something to fill that void. And as a result, what happened is the Palestinian people in prison remained committed to what it is they got in prison for to begin with, right? They remained committed to the national liberation movement. They remained committed to ending the colonial system in its entirety, and also, more importantly, to internationalism. It was never just about Palestine. Palestine has always been a very international struggle. And so for us, the hunger strike and imprisonment represents that. It's the one unifying thread within the Palestinian society. So even recently, with the recent hunger strike, the significance about it is it wasn't an individual going on hunger strike. It wasn't one particular faction going on hunger strike. It was all the factions pretty much uniting to put forth certain demands, very basic demands, similar to those of people here struggling, but coming together collectively as Palestinian society for the rights of prisoners and for the dignity and liberation of all people, right? And so it galvanized everyone, and there were tents everywhere, and it wasn't just from one area or one neighborhood or one city, but families were really unified in a different way. And for us in diaspora, that's always the case, no matter who's in prison and no matter who's on hunger strike. We will normally and historically come together, unified to support and show opposition to the conditions inside and to support the struggler. But with this particular hunger strike, it was that much more significant that it really did unite Palestinians across all sectors in society, and galvanize students, and galvanize elders, and galvanize families, because every Palestinian has a family member that's in prison, right? And so when you see all the factions coming together, that means chances are you know somebody that was in prison, or that your family member is in prison, or part of that hunger strike. So it was that much more significant for us here in the Bay Area, and I think that was just one layer to add to the conversation around how what she described and the significance of that particular hunger strike, which has been lost. People aren't talking about it anymore. But the impact of it is still talked about in Palestine and in our movements about what does that mean, and how do we actually reflect on the organizing that happened as a result, particularly in our diaspora, and how do we reflect on the significance and the wins that happened on the ground based on how people unified themselves.
I'm just wondering if you can clarify this question of both Israeli and PA prisons.
So, Leif mentioned there's only one Israeli prison in the West Bank, which is technically the occupied territory. However, there are several Palestinian Authority prisons in the West Bank, and the Palestinian Authority being those who are tasked with administering the Palestinian population in the West Bank. And then there's also Gaza, which has its own administration, which semi-connects and coordinates with the West Bank. So what the Palestinian Authority basically accomplished for Israel was a way in which Israel could then control and manipulate both economically and politically and culturally and socially the Palestinian population within the occupied territory of the West Bank. So now they're collaborating directly with the Palestinian Authority, which is funded by the United States, which collaborates with the state of Israel, and actually imprisons Palestinians on a daily basis. So they also imprison Palestinians within the West Bank, but under Palestinian Authority prisons. Also, PA is known to imprison Arab prisoners that are not Palestinian, that are active or political and challenging colonial character of the state of Israel. So that's really the distinction. So there are Israeli prisons, but there's also the Palestinian Authority prisons. And so when he mentioned that they had solidarity tents throughout the West Bank and throughout Palestine to put pressure on the PA and to negotiate with the Israelis, it's not because we believe in negotiating with Israelis. It's because we know the PA and Israel are working in collaboration and together just to put pressure on both, essentially. So we're challenging both.
I just had a couple of other little things that I think would be helpful to throw out. One to be, maybe you can clarify something about this question of administrative detention and how that's used.
Mm-hmm. So people can be charged and for several lifetime sentences, but people can also be put on administrative detention with no sentence. And that can be renewed time and time and time and time again. Ahmed Qatamish, who was recently re-imprisoned, it served one of the longest administrative detention sentences, which means you're put in prison, there's no charge, that they can continue to renew the administrative detention based on security threats that are unknown. And he did so for 5 years at one point. He was in prison multiple times, and just recently he was in prison again. So administrative detention has become a way both to terrorize Palestinian society because they use it against children, use it against adults, and they're renewing it time and time again, and so there's absolutely no legality or framework. There's no way to actually challenge it. One of Addameer's main campaigns is to put an end to administrative detention. It could be comparable to solitary confinement here in the United States. And so that is something that has been practiced more and more since 1970, the early 70s, I believe. They've been practicing that more and more as a way around charging and going through the courts, but actually just mass imprisonment of Palestinians across the board.
And the last little area that I was hoping to flush out a little bit is that over time there's been conditions that have forced the Israelis to release prisoners. But what we're seeing now is the recapturing of some of the very people that were released, 5, 10 years ago on a very focused and political basis, and then re-arresting them and reinstating their original sentences. Do you see this as a developing trend? You describe it in terms of how it fits into that framework that you're talking about.
Yeah, historically, Palestinian prisoners carry a lot of weight. And because both of their leadership in the movement, there's a lot of political leadership that is taken from those inside. They work directly with the movement outside. And so when they're back out, even in particular in prisoner exchanges, they then become a threat to the state of Israel because these are leaders who are respected and loved and admired, and treated as heroes as they should be. And so there has been a trend of re-imprisoning people that have been in the prisoner exchanges, and most recently there was Yusuf Abu Khair, who spent 35 years in exile after he was sentenced to 2 life sentences. And then in 89 was part of the prisoner exchange, was deported, forced deportation as part of that exchange. That was the agreement. When he returned 34 years later, he was just re-imprisoned. And they don't know where he is, and they have no idea what location he's been put in. And so this is one example of someone who served their time for whatever that's worth, and then was part of an agreement for whatever that's worth, and then found themselves re-imprisoned. Now, this has happened time and time again. And part of this is to, also terrorize people who think that, there's a huge celebration when a prisoner is released. It changes, it's a victory, as it should be here as well. It means a lot to the families. It's, we don't have many victories in Palestine. So when a prisoner is released, it is celebrated in the streets like a wedding, right? And there was also Bilal al-Qaid recently last year, who was imprisoned after several years, and it was a huge victory when he was released. He served his time, and only a few weeks later was put back in prison under administrative detention. So the prisoner exchange is even that much more heavy, because the people that are exchanged in those prisoner exchanges are some of the strongest leaders, the people most galvanized in society. And so when they are released, it is something that we see as a victory. And then when they are re-imprisoned, it's very demoralizing. That has been happening.
And we can get back to some of that too, and you can draw more questions or comments when we get back into a back and forth conversation. I wanted to give you, Marie, a chance to say a few words about maybe to frame it. You mentioned that there were 300 strikes in California, and also an agreement to end hostilities, which is a very significant part of that struggle, as well as core demands that were the basis of organizing what culminated in 30,000 prisoners in 2013 taking unitary action in the state of California. That's the framework, but you have a pretty amazing story yourself in terms of, you know, your own experience and your own life in relationship to that, and what brought you back together, what rekindled your relationship with your brother, who was one of the leaders from Pelican Bay, who helped collectively craft this whole campaign that emerged from inside. Maybe you could talk about that for a minute, too.
Okay, so they did, the prisoners at Pelican Bay State Prison went on 300 strikes, two in 2011. The first one for 21 days. There were 6,600 prisoners who participated throughout the prison system. Then there were, the second one was in September. They still didn't get their demands, which were, let me just read them real quick. Eliminate group punishment, abolish the debriefing policy, and modify active, inactive gang status criteria, comply with recommendations of U.S. Commission on Safety and Abuse in America's Prisons from 2006, provide adequate food, provide constructive programs and privileges for indefinite shoot inmates. In September, there were 12,000 prisoners who participated, and it fluctuates. I heard 18 days and 21 days. Nevertheless, there were 12,000 people that participated. In 2013, there were 30,000 prisoners who participated, and it was for 60 days. And me getting involved through the first hunger strike, my brother and I didn't have any contact prior to that for at least 15 or plus years. Partly because of me and his condition, what he was going through, I couldn't bear. So my mother and my sister visited, and one of my aunts visited with him at least once a year. And when he started, along with 3 other prisoners, it was a black man, which is my brother. There's a northerner Mexican, a southern Mexican, and a white Aryan brother. Those were the 4 gangs that they called, because they called them gang members. So anyway, there were 4 main ways that they could be called a gang member, which is to have a tattoo, to have Aztec art, to acknowledge someone in passing, and to read a George Jackson book, or have mail that came in that had George Jackson's name on it. So they labeled these guys as gang members, put them in solitary confinement, and threw away the key, basically. So through that first hunger strike, I read you the demands. They wanted to end all of those things. And my brother said that I'm going to go on this hunger strike. If I die, I die. But he wanted to stand up for the people that were coming behind him. He didn't want them to have to go through what he went through in solitary confinement. A windowless cell, in their cell for 23, almost 24 hours a day, but 23 hours a day. Their yard where they go exercise in was a concrete dog run, is what they call it. So it's no grass. They don't get a chance to see any of the outside. And they had like a skylight in the yard, which is all cemented around, and they could see just a little glimpse of sunlight, but no birds, no flies, no this, no that. So getting involved in this with my brother, I didn't know anything about how the conditions were at first. And I feel like basically God pushed me into this movement with my brother. And my mom was ill at the time. My sister had already passed away, and I got involved to support my brother. And in 2012, they wrote an agreement. Like Claude was saying, they wrote an agreement to end all hostilities amongst the races, because what they realized as prisoners was that the guards and all of the different units in the prison system were setting them apart, against one another. And I like to say that my brother was the mastermind in that, but I think all of them experienced it, and they came together and they said, we got to do something about this. We cannot keep allowing them to do this to us. And so those 4 groups came together and stuck together, and they wrote this agreement to end hostilities, and something that they wanted to go to everywhere. They wanted it to be inside the prisons, inside the detention centers, inside the jails, the juvenile halls. They even want it on the streets, at the recreation centers. I've spoken about putting it on billboards, which is something that I think, even on the outside, there's so much racism, and I really hate to call him president, because I think that what happens at the top, trickles down to the body, and we've seen so much of the hatred that he spewed out of his mouth during his campaign, and for him to be elected is beyond me. But it's just for that reason alone, to have that agreement so that we cannot or, would not fight against one another, and that we as individuals would love one another. And especially what they're experiencing in Palestine for year in and year out and year in. If my brother went inside, and he is inside now, but if he came out and then they took him back, how would be devastated? So I can imagine how those families feel. My heart goes out to them to have their loved one out for a short period of time and then go right back into the same. I tell you, I wouldn't know how to handle that. I wouldn't. And so, again, my heart goes out to them, all the families who have experienced that, and the recidivism stuff that happens here, it happens. People get involved because they can't make it. They make it so difficult for people to make it on the outside. And in that situation, it's a little different because they get hooked up back with the same kind of, things that they were doing in the past, or maybe something new, but they wind up back in the system. And so those hunger strikes, in 2012, there was a lawsuit, and because of the lawsuit, they can no longer have a group punishment. They can no longer have indefinite shoe terms. They can no longer have treat these guys like they were treating them. And the adequate food, that still needs improvement, as well as the medical care. So it's a challenge. It's a challenge, and the fight still goes on. The fight still goes on.
One of the things about what's happening in California is the question of enforcement. Right? So there was a settlement in the civil suit against the prison system, as Marie's saying. Things got agreed to, but that doesn't necessarily guarantee implementation. And so the structure of the prison itself hasn't really, its purpose and who governs it and how decisions are made are fundamentally the same, but the struggle both inside as well as a level of being able to reference an agreement is the leverage that there is. But I think the other thing that Marie represents that was particularly striking to me personally, having done prison work for really a long time, was the emergence of family members like herself that became very mobilized and politicized and active in this process. To me, that's one of the key things that distinguishes the struggle in California, that it actually became far broader than the kind of prison movement that existed prior to that. And so the leverage and the support that the prisoners were receiving from the outside played a very important role in emboldening both them to continue to struggle and fight for fundamental human rights issues, but also for the first time to start to create a public presence that was antithetical to the criminalization that the prisons serve. And it's a beginning. This is by no means, the prison population in California has been adjusted, but it's really not been reduced through various machinations. I mean, that's a whole discussion, and the details aren't that important, but, and the prison population in the United States has also not diminished. So, the reason I reference family members and communities starting to become engaged is, I think, I'm sure you would agree, that's the basis in the long run of starting to transform public opinion and start to challenge this massive criminalization. But there's challenges for the movement in the United States. I think there's a couple. One of them is that it doesn't have any kind of internationalist perspective in terms of how does any of this fit into a world that's, in fact, in a level of struggle. And I think the second aspect or challenge is for us to figure out how to deepen people's understanding of mass imprisonment and the role it plays, and to see how it's connected to the unrestrained police violence that exists in our communities. It's part of a continuum. The survivors of the assaults that happen end up in the cages, and that's been true for a long time. We talk about the 60s and the type of movements, like the Black Panthers that challenged the police directly in the community. Well, people who survived those struggles remain political prisoners today. So that our movements don't even acknowledge the people that have fallen, whether they're members of the community or the leaders that took on the issue of police violence in 1967 or 68 or 72. There are U.S. political prisoners, for example, who are members of the Black Panther Party who are in their 40-something year, 43 or 45, depending on who you're talking about, and they're not even, their names are not common like the name Oscar Lopez Rivera was for the Puerto Rican independence movement. The difference is very stark, and I'll just say one really quick thing and we'll kind of wrap up and open this up. In traveling to Puerto Rico, every small town in the mountains, it didn't matter where, had something visual in their town to recognize the imprisonment of Oscar Lopez Rivera, which meant that the movement to demand his release was very massive. It included people who were in favor of statehood or commonwealth, which is the continuation of colonialism in Puerto Rico, as well as people who were part of the independence movement, from which Oscar emerges and becomes an active participant. That's what it took to get him out. But that same, to me, the example of that becomes very instructive in terms of what needs to get built in this country that rehumanizes who these folks are that are locked up, that demands that they be reintegrated into our communities, into our families, into our lives, and that people who risk, their own well-being to struggle for liberation, self-determination, for human rights, to end the white supremacist nature of the system, to end the imperial nature of the system and how it functions. When you do that, you take a risk. If that risk results in, in conflict and harm, whether you're doing something and are convicted of it, or don't do something and are set up, or just get wrapped up in day-to-day survival issues that bring you into that prison environment, that should not mean an end to your relationship to community and family. And we play a role in reclaiming that, and that's what our job is. That's why campaigning for political prisoners is integral to realizing that people in struggle take risks, and that can end us in prison. That doesn't become the end of it. And for people who are surviving in the community and might screw up, that doesn't mean the end for them either. That's the fundamental injustice of how this stuff works. And so what the hunger strikes represent in California, among other things, is a coming to consciousness on a pretty mass level inside, and a willingness to put people's lives on the line, which is a very serious thing. That commitment needs to be elevated. That commitment needs to be recognized and supported by us. And that politicization is a huge threat to the fundamental nature of what the prison as an institution is in our society. So the prison can maintain a military control over the population because they've got the guns and everybody's locked in cages. But that consciousness is what breaks through that. And so the fact that close to a quarter of the prisoners in California took action in 2013 should be recognized as a totally transformative set of events. Because it is. Because it's unprecedented. Because it hasn't ever happened like that. And so for us, we need to say, well, what's our responsibility in that process? How is that connected to when we go out and, struggle against the militarization of police and urban shield, or are out on the streets when the cops execute a member of our communities? That's a connected thing. It's not a disconnected thing.
Start with the parallels around administrative segregation and administrative detention. It doesn't come to a surprise that there's parallels between the United States and Israel, right? They collaborate and share tactics, and Israel is at the forefront of a lot of those strategies and tactics, and the world is learning from how they imprison and control the populations in Palestine. I would say the work around campaigning and what can be done around that is very context-based, right? So, which leads to the other thing that you mentioned around the parallels of the divide and the movement. One lesson to be learned from Palestine that I think we have to offer more broadly is the way we don't invisibilize prisoners. They aren't forgotten. Here in the United States, oftentimes the activists or the leadership or those that are galvanized or posters are made about them or they're spray painted everywhere. Those are people that are living out there in the world, who are popularized, oftentimes for good reasons, but you never really see pictures or images or billboards of prisoners, right? Now, throughout the streets of Palestine, it's only sprayed images of prisoners. Those are the people that people are remembering. Those are the people that people are lifting up. Those are the people that people aren't forgetting, intentionally so. You go to any home, there's a framed picture of a prisoner, more likely than not a family member. And that constant reminder of their leadership to not be forgotten also forces you to relate to that differently. So it's not so much that movements are just divided, that's by design, right? They've been ruptured and fractured over time. But there's a way that intentionally, being more intentional about lifting up those leaders, which also relates to the question you brought around the question of community and just, segregation of that. And part of the work of the prison system is to make it that much more difficult for families to visit and connect. Right? That's why the demand of the hunger strikers recently in Palestine, more family visits, because they are trying to disconnect more and more so.
I think the community being involved, and like you said, I think that's a great idea to have the pictures of the prisoners up there to make it well known that these are people that we care about, and we want you to care about them too. I think so much of our community has, I guess it's just groups of people have forgotten, and if you're not a victim or a person that's victimized for somebody, you're not connected. There's no connection where people want to even be involved. Oh, that's them. I don't want to, push away from that. But I think that showing the love and displaying the pictures is showing the love for that person. And also, you said something that triggered something. Let me see if I wrote it down. Claude said it, I think, about humanizing the individuals and because the media paints them as monsters, here in America. They're monsters. Whether they did a violent crime or not, they're in prison and they paint them as monsters. So we have to make that, to paint the picture differently, how we see them, and push back from being afraid. I found so much energy in going down to Sacramento and fighting on behalf of them, doing the rallies and standing up before the legislators and just saying, demanding change, even though it didn't really come from that. It came through the lawsuit. But we still, as a group, as a family, have to push together. And again, putting the billboard up, writing out the agreement to end hostilities, and just making it known that these people, our family members, do exist. And the family members that pulled together during that time, we were a strong unit. I will never forget. We were in Jeffrey Beard's conference room down in Sacramento. He's the secretary for California Department of Corrections. And Stainer said, "We hear you," talking about the family members. It was 5 of us in there. "We hear you, loud and clear. We hear you. We hear you." He said it about 5 times. I was like, "Oh, you hear us? We're going to get louder." And that's what we did. We got louder, and so it got bigger. And as Claude was saying about the media got involved, and it was just everywhere, just publicized everywhere. So I think that's important to know your strength. And there is a group that I do work with, Essie Justice Group. And Essie Justice Group works with women of incarcerated loved ones, so, and it's a growing organization right now, and they're working on letting the public know how many women are really being affected by the loved ones who are incarcerated.
I see the hand. But there was one thing that I was hoping you could, I'd like to bring Sitawa into this space, because we actually, through you, sent him a little bit of an outline of what we were trying to do tonight. Mm-hmm. And rather than trying to cover all of it, one of the things that I thought was really cool about what he was talking about, because we talked a little bit beforehand, is the way that he and the prisoners inside were envisioning the use of agreement and hostilities among youth still in the community, I'm wondering if you could just expand on that briefly, and then we'll open it up to the next question.
Okay. So what he was saying was that the agreement to end hostilities is to break down the barriers between each race. And they're doing it still in the inside. It came from solitary confinement to shoot in Pelican Bay, and when they dispersed them all in different prisons, they didn't give it up. They continued on with it. And so they're teaching the same thing in every prison that they go in, that they have systems through. And he specifically said that he believes that it should go to the recreation centers. You know, we used to have recreation centers. We don't really have them much anymore. But that's what he was saying, that it should be out there in recreation centers, going to the schools. I often say, go into the grade schools. Don't even go, I mean, you can go to the high schools, but it begins in elementary school, you know, and then it goes to junior high school. I mean, kids are 10 years old getting in trouble in juvenile hall, you know, so we have to start at that grade school level, and that's what he was talking about. Go into the community in those places where the children are and the youth are, and speak to them about, you know, not fighting against one another, and to hold up that agreement to end hostility. Because what it does is that if you get into these gangs that are on the street, they get into these fights, and then they're locked up, and that's the whole system. That's how it all begins. Is, you know, I was just reading something. I can't remember verbatim what it said, but it was the groups that are on the outside. If we can reach them and really talk to them, relate to them. I mean, you know, sometimes we see young people and we see them doing something that we don't like, and we don't want to be bothered with them. We don't want to, you know, talk with them. But we have to be bold enough and confident enough that we have something inside of us that they need. And we have to give them what we have and not be afraid to do it. You know, and I'm speaking to everybody in this room. We cannot be afraid to reach out to a youth, because what we say to them can be so powerful and so impacting that it changes the very course of their lives. But we got to know that we have something to share.
I feel like the connections are pretty obvious, right? So it's just a question of what is our role in that? What are we doing to lift that up? And going back to the question about what Palestine has to offer, it's not even so much that we just have to offer it. It's not that I recognize a lot of you in the room. You are the ones going out there and doing the work of in every meeting or every event facing, and what about the prisoners? And what about the prisoners? And the fact that here in the United States and in the Bay Area, it's not automatically considered, it's not automatically thought about. Organizers, activists don't automatically integrate that in their analysis or even their strategies and take it into consideration, or even take leadership from inside. And here, you know, there's so much work and talk about detentions and ICE raids, and everyone is up in arms about it. Very little talk about the fact that people are on hunger strike inside. So it also, I think, is indicative of a broader sort of cultural dynamic here about the invisibility of people inside, even as it's talked about, right? And there's a lot of actions and interest, but there isn't a lot of work and organizing to pay attention to their leadership and their political struggles.
I would just add that currently the hunger strikes that are happening outside of Tacoma, which is one of the largest prisons for people in the process of being deported, is one thing. But here in Contra Costa, there's a prison that has essentially been taken over by ICE, and some of us have gone to a mobilization outside of the gates, which was a good start, but in fact, there's some very concrete things that we can do here in the Bay Area to address both the ways in which, you know, people are being targeted for deportation, but also the fact that people are being imprisoned, you know, in a county, you know, like 20 minutes from here, or maybe a little longer if you're in San Francisco, but you know, there's a way to make this far more concrete than what what's been done up to this point. And, in terms of what organizing work looks like over time, I think it's really critical that we see that as really a significant way of addressing the different aspects of repression, Islamophobia, anti-immigrant stuff, certainly stuff targeting people from Mexico or other parts of the Americas. So we have a resource sheet. Where are they? For people who are leaving, if you want a resource sheet, it's just a way for you to go to various websites and sign up for emails so that if you want more consistent information, it includes a lot of the groups we've mentioned, including Addameer in Palestine, but also AROC, prison, the Freedom Archives. We do an e-list around prison issues as well. It's easy to sign up for things like that and to stay informed. PHSS, which Marie mentioned, is part of that too. If you want to go and read the Agreement to End Hostilities, we brought a couple of copies. We didn't mass produce them, but it's an important read because it's such a seminal piece of writing to come out of the prisons, as well as the core demands that were brought together in 2011 out of Pelican Bay. So, you can be more informed.
It doesn't matter if you're not blood. You understand what I'm saying?
I do. I feel the prison system does not.
But you know what? Unless you have, to me, this is just in my head, if you don't have anything that's keeping you from supporting that person, like if you took something in the mail and it was something that they said, oh no, this person is off limits, they can't come here again. If you haven't did anything like that, I would continue to protest to say, no, I'm going to support this person, I'm going to go visit them, I'm going to write them, I'm going to, if they receive phone calls, you accept the phone calls, but don't back down. Just don't back down, you stand your ground, and you don't back down. You continue to support. Everybody that is locked up deserves and needs support. So don't let the system stop you. Don't let the system run you away. So be encouraged.
For me, I've been corresponding with a trans prisoner in a male prison in Texas for years. I can't wrap my mind around how challenging that is. And when I was in a male prison, there were a number of trans prisoners in that prison too, and it's like, the level of hostility and just unbelievable, not just from staff, but obviously the homophobic nature and both the white supremacist and male supremacist nature of the institution itself, as is structured to, add level upon level of violence to that experience. And I think it's important that you raise this, and I think it's important that we, see this question of family and community in a much broader way. Because I think that's the only way we can speak to challenging the homophobic nature of society and community anyway. So the relationship is clear, and prison work is one way of doing it. I mean, it's only one aspect of it, but it's pretty crazy. I can't quite place myself in the position of somebody being targeted like that, despite having done time.
So it was interesting because I didn't know the people who were going up to, other family members who were going up to Pelican Bay to visit. But I was connected through another organizer, Dorsey Nunn, who was the one that really told me how the conditions were inside. So he connected me with people. He helped to connect me to this person and that person, and that's how I got connected with Dolores Canales. She became a part of California Families. She helped start California Families Against Solitary Confinement, CFAS, and she partnered with Prisoner Hunger Strike Solidarity Coalition. So in the midst of me going up to visit my brother, she was the second time that I went up, she volunteered to take me. She's Hispanic. And, it was just, we became family. It was so many of the people that I associated with through CFAS where we became family, and we were strangers in the beginning, but we became that family that we needed to stick together. And when I said it was 5 of us in the room with Jeffrey Beard, we were a strong unit. We were a strong unit, but that was because we came together as family. And what we did is that we represented the agreement to end hostilities. That was a strong point. We were the family members of these different races that came together and was a strong family together. So what they were modeling in the inside, we modeled on the outside.
Yeah, I think in Palestine, that's often modeled by the mothers. So they are at the forefront of the protests and demonstrations on the outside. They're the ones leading delegations to confront the prisons head-on. So they take buses with mothers of all the prisoners, and they have photographs of their children or other people's children. And they get to the prisons, and they are bravely, courageously sort of confronting the state, right? Simply with their bodies and the images and symbolism, right, of the memory of those that are secured inside, and are able to raise a lot of awareness that way, but also strengthen power for the prisoners on the inside and for themselves amongst one another.
I think there are organizations on the other side of the bay in Oakland. I can't. Galvez.
Courage.
Yeah, that's.
Community United for the Story that you.
Yes. So there's one right there. Thank you. Thank you. But one time I was taking my granddaughter to her elementary school in Oakland, and the principal from the junior high school, which is not far away, was down there talking, reaching out to parents, and he was trying to get the students that were graduating from the elementary school to come up to his junior high school, and he was saying that things have changed. I'm like, well, how were they? They were bad things, but the conditions, I guess, the students, they changed it some kind of way. So somebody has reached out to that school, and he felt like now we can recruit people, and so I told him that I work with prisoners, and I started telling him about what I did, and he welcomed me to come and talk to the students there, and I told him that, I wanted to begin talking with people at the elementary school level, but my life has been so busy I haven't been able to do that, and I don't want to use the word busy, it's full.
It's busy, right?
I think right now the NLG is working a lot with that. The National Lawyers Guild, they're doing a lot around that, what you just spoke of. So.
I mean, to me, the other thing is to really using our understanding of history to challenge the colonial nature of what defines immigration. What is the legitimacy of this border, of this line drawn in this particular location? And what does it mean that people are traveling north? driven by wanting to reconnect with family, or economically, it's a way to obtain employment. I mean, it is a colonial border. Some people that we've been working with in the course of a documentary that we're about to release say they actually encourage people to come north because it's about reclaiming the northern part of Mexico, or it's about reclaiming a level of connection to the land. And so the issue of land becomes very central to that argument. I'm not saying that's exactly a solution, and it doesn't address, the state, as well as people who buy into their arguments about criminality, do this. Certainly, Islamophobia is there's a way to accept a wedge being driven between good Muslim, bad Muslim, the same way as good immigrant, bad immigrant. I mean, what is that about, and who's driving that, and what is really behind it? The whole examination of anti-Muslim, violence in a period like this. I mean, it's exacerbated by the current who's in power issue, but isn't new. And I feel like when looking at this, when we're talking about people who practice the faith of Islam, that's been used as a wedge among black people as well. So what allowed them to vilify the Nation of Islam or Malcolm X? What about the prisoners who convert to Islam when they're in prison, and how are they dealt with? This is a big deal inside. And, so the fabric of all of this it's helpful to step back and look at the larger ways that, this is functioning in the world, and to challenge some of the colonial definitions. That's a whole other conversation, which we're not going to launch into, but, what does it mean if that's an illegitimate border? What constitutes an illegal immigrant? What does that even mean in the context of the creation of this nation state through all the means that it does it, genocide and, enslavement, expansion, and war. So.
The prisoners they were in the short corridor. So they were together, and then they moved them around in the prison, and then they say, oh no, these are the worst of the worst, so let's put these guys back together. So they put them back together, and over the period of, I think, 10 years or more, they were, talking about this whole thing all the time, and when they finally got in the same area again, they put it together. Now, it sounds interesting because they were in solitary. But they made it happen. Even to start the hunger strikes, they were in solitary confinement. And they asked for help on the outside, and the people that they consulted with on the outside said, you guys get it started and we'll jump in. And so they did. They got it started, and that's when a lot of organizations got involved, and I found out about it. I was told about it, and I got involved. Yeah.
Maybe each of us could just say a quick something to close up. It's been good to have you all part of this, and we can replicate this either with ourselves or with other folks. So part of the question is, where are there other venues where conversations like this can happen? That's what I would say.
I'm grateful to be here, and thank you for asking me. That was very sweet, and it was a way to get back connected.
That's true.
Yeah. I've been full for a while, and I'm actually starting a new business. I've been self-employed since 1989, and as a barber stylist, but I'm starting a new business called Mom's Pastries. Mom's is the first initial of myself and my 3 sons. I was a single mother raising 3 sons, and I started this business. So it's Marie, Olin, Mawuli, and Majid. So Mom's with 2 M's. Yeah. So this bakery is focusing right now on baking banana nut bread, or organic banana nut bread and organic banana raisin nut bread. And my goal is to employ formerly incarcerated people. And I want to cut down on the recidivism rate, and give them a livable wage so that they don't have to return. They can stay out. And I want to say that's my contribution, and that's what I've been really focusing on. And I stepped back from a lot of organizations to get this started. So in August of this year, a couple of months from now, I'll be starting. And you guys, for the ones that are on the other side of the bay, heard of Farmer Joe's Market? Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that's one of the stores that my banana nut bread will be in. And Ratto's down on Washington. It's a restaurant and store, so my bread will also be there. And there are other places that I'm seeking, and people have encouraged me to try, but right now, to get my bread in, but right now, I'm working on getting my licenses, so I have to come up with all of this money to get all of the licenses so that I will be marketable in the store. I don't want nobody coming in there saying, oh, this is not legit. No, that's not going to happen, right? So I have to get my stuff legit so that when I get in the stores, it can go somewhere, and really touch lives, not just the lives of the prisoners, but even the people who are consuming the product. So.
It's been really inspiring to hear from you again. I've heard you speak before about the hunger strike, and also to be in space with you all. There's so much more to learn from you than there is for you to share. But just some final thoughts on reflecting on this political moment, and similar to what you were talking about, Michelle, about the good immigrant bad argument. I think this particular moment also offers us an opportunity to find deeper layers of solidarity. When the Muslim ban first happened, people were shocked that these Muslims who have green cards or visas are now not allowed to enter. But, it makes more sense for folks who cross this border illegally to be detained. And so there was a lot of political education in our own community to be like, no, actually, these are all the trajectory, right, and part and parcel of the same struggle. And while there's also potential for more divisiveness, because the state knows that, and that's part of what they do on purpose, there's also some potential, I think, for the ways in which it's expanding state repression, for a lot more people to be gulped into that and more people to understand themselves as part of something larger. Our youth are working on a mural in the mission on Clear and Alley on state repression. Mm-hmm. And so we've done some political education with them on what that means, and idealize certain former political prisoners and leaders in the Arab world. Mm-hmm. And that's been interesting, and I'm happy to share that with you. Curriculum, but also an interesting experience to work through and struggle through some of the internalized oppressions that we all carry, but also learned a lot from this moment and this particular political moment and the opportunities that it offers us to really build on something really beautiful. And even, this agreement to end hostilities, and made me think I want to use that with our youth, right, and to really build on some of the work we've been doing.
So thank you all.